Hi, everyone. Thank you, all of you who joined us. So first of all, big shout out to Matan Dobroshin and Aviv Malka for supporting this initiative. And let's talk about vulnerabilities. Vulnerabilities, CVEs, are a key foundation to as we calculate risk today. Right? I mean, as us as a vendor and what we see today in the community, in the industry, this is usually the basic of how we start. You find assets, what's the vulnerable, and based on that, what's the impact and everything related to that. So the main question is, how do we quantify risk when there are no vulnerabilities? Now, especially in OT, the lifespan of assets are years, right? So this becomes even more critical because the type of versions and the amount of upgrades we have is limited. So does unknown risk equal to no risk? That's the main question we're going to address today. We're seeing and think about, you have assets within your production sites, and some without any risk attached to them, you see risk zero, and everything looks fine. And others, you might start seeing some risks because they have some vulnerabilities attached to them. But does it really mean that one is more riskier than another? So for our analysis, what we did is we went out and checked multiple customer environments. Now, on purpose, we took two different customers at different sizes and different industries in different regions to understand what's the status out there. What we saw, now, of course, after we saw a few that you always see the big ones, like the Siemens and the Rockwell and the Schneider, but we saw that every time we went to a site and we looked at the system, there are a few more dozens vendors that we never saw before. So all in all, about 20 sites from different regions, different industries, we saw more than 200 vendors. Some of them are very known, and some of them probably none of us ever heard about. The second thing we did was, okay, let's understand from the vulnerability standpoint. So we went and looked on CISA's advisories over the last 8 years. And what we've learned is that 34% were vendors that appeared more than once. Now, this is an indication that they take security seriously, right? So they release more advisories. It's not one time, it's a systematic approach. And 66% only appeared once. What this tells us is that this was a one-time thing. And I'm not even talking about vendors that did not even appear even once. And we're talking about thousands of advisories. Additionally, what we did, we said, okay, let's try and give some asset classification with relation to CVEs. So we went and categorized 3 different categories. I'll start on the right one. We have the category where they have a lot of known CVEs. And you have there the Siemens, the Rockwell, the Schneider. It means that they take security seriously. Then we saw the second group that have between 1 to 3 vulnerabilities. Again, this is an indication that this is not systematic. And then we looked for vendors or specific products that basically have none. So for us, and we're talking about assets that has been existing for years, this tells something. Within our analysis, within our research, within our initiative, what we're going to talk about are the second and the third group that either has nothing, or again, it doesn't look like a systematic approach, but more like a one-time thing. So I don't think this is going to be new to anyone, right? Usually when we calculate risk, we take 2 main, it might differ, but like we take 2 main aspects when we calculate risk. One is really the vulnerability likelihood and probability of what might happen. And the other one is severity or impact, where basically we then have risk. Now, when you don't have any vulnerability, then usually risk is 0, and basically there's no risk based on the common risk modeling. So for that, and we try to take an approach that's going to help hopefully each and every one of us in a simplified way to find an alternative vulnerability risk parameter. How can I quantify, how can I assess those vendors, those assets without nothing? So we took two main categories. One, vendor measures. How much this vendor take security seriously? What do they do about it? What type of indications we can learn about this vendor? And the second part are device measures, meaning on the specific product, on the specific device, whether we can say something more specifically. So let's take a look on vendor measures. So when we're talking about vendor measures, what we took are three main parameters. Number one is vulnerability management policy. Do they have any public policy? What are disclosure process? Is it something that, again, indicate that this vendor takes vulnerabilities seriously? Number two are certifications and CNA status. So there are multiple certifications that are vendor general, right? What are we talking about, from very basic ISO 27001 to IEC, I don't know, 6244341 for development lifecycle, etc. And we have CNA status that basically is something that indicate that this specific vendor, by the authority of the CVE numbering, basically they got this status. This is, for example, something that we have today. And the third one is provision of general security guidelines. When they release their products, does it come with security guidelines? So those are the three main parameters. When we talk about device measures, we took 5 main parameters. The first one, CVE for similar devices. So in the OT space, you have a lot of the same devices from the same series. So whether it's Siemens or Rockwell, they basically publish multiple devices and products, and you have a family and you have a series of devices. So trying to take a look on others within this category. Potential attack surface means whether there are multiple security configurations that could be introduced to this asset, from passwords to authentication to different types of ports being opened and things like that. The third one, firmware and OS versions recency. So how recently the vendor released different types of updates for this specific solution. That again indicates that there are more software investments in this product and that hopefully security is being addressed. Lifecycle status, end of life, end of support, whether it's close to that, whether it's not, how much time does the product has until it gets there. And the last one is IEC certification, because we do have certifications on the device level. So we took dozens, if not maybe hundreds of devices and vendors, and we started running simulations, okay, to try and see what should be the right parameters, weights, calculation, what should be more stronger and impact each and every parameter. And this is what we come up with, where basically you see the different weights for each and every parameter and how much it affects the overall scoring when we are calculating. And what we did is, to some extent, we looked at the CVSS scoring mechanism. We tried to not invent the wheel, but take something that already works and is common within the industry. And based on that, also for simplification purposes, we gave the option between 1 to 5 to give a score for each and every parameter. So at the end of the day, this will build all of our scoring for either the asset or the vendor. Now, this is something that still is challenging to do in scale. And the goal is not to go and do it for each and every asset and for each and every vendor you have, right? So we came up with an approach to try and help you when you are going to use it on what type of devices, on what type of vendors you should. So the first one is, if I'm an asset owner, first to review most common devices in my environment. Meaning, if I have a specific vendor that I see a lot of his assets in my environment, probably this is a good place to start if I don't see any CVEs attached. The second one really is detect whether their specific vendor or those specific devices don't have any published CVEs. Right? A lot of us, and including us as a vendor, right, we're talking about visibility and vulnerability management, so there should be some things hopefully in place to help us understand where we are. The third step is detecting end-of-life, end-of-support devices. Now, this is tricky because we do see a lot in the OT space that not, I would say, everyone has their own visibility to that level for OT devices. Because on IT devices, it's pretty much straightforward. With the OS and Windows and Linux, etc., you have some very clear policy. When we're talking about OT devices, controllers from so different vendors with different catalog numbers and different families, it's really hard to track. So hopefully you are able to track that, but again, this is a good indication. And if you do monitor that the device is already with end of life, then of course, hopefully it resonates with the risk level. And then you can decide whether you want to focus on that or you actually want to focus on assets that you don't see that you have those types of alerts on. The fourth step is review firmware and OS updates. When was this device last updated? Was it 10 years ago? Was it 5 years ago? By the way, sometimes it could be that within our environment it was not updated, but the vendor did release updates occasionally, right? So those are the 4 main steps to do before getting to the last one of, okay, now I understand what I want to use the calculator for. So we took 2 examples, just for us to understand really how it works. Zebra printers, they are basically one of the leading providers for label printers and other types of printers. And what we saw is that, okay, they exist from 1969. And up to 2019, there was no CVE to any one of those devices. What happened is in August 2019, a CVE was identified. And I don't know if luckily for them, but affecting all of their products. Again, this is an indication for us that probably until that day, it was never addressed. And just to take one of their leading products, right, Zebra 105 SL, for 16 years, no vulnerability, not at all. So if we take Zebra as a vendor and we put it within the calculator, so for the vulnerability management policy, okay, and I take it from a snapshot of the year before, so 2018, they had nothing. No vulnerability policy, nothing at all. From certifications and CNA status, they did have some general certification from an IT security standpoint, so let's give them a 4. And provisions of general security guidelines, they did provide some guidelines of security, but we really tried to analyze that and we saw something very generic, but we still gave them a 3. And we're seeing that if we were using this calculator 1 year before the CVE was released, this was the score of the Zebra printers within my environment. Let's take another interesting example. Okay, Stuxnet, we're all aware of this event. Siemens devices, we're talking about WinCC and PCS7 software-based devices that are quite common we see within many environments. We're talking about WinCC version 6.5 that was affected, released from 2005. PCS7 version 6 from 2002. And in June 2010, basically the Stuxnet event came to light. And in July, Siemens released, of course, patches and CVEs according to that. So if I take this example 1 year before in 2009, and I try to quantify the risk of those specific devices, I get to those specific numbers. So from vulnerability management policy, they didn't have none. Okay, so Siemens today are investing a lot in cybersecurity. But back then, nothing. No vulnerability management policy, no disclosure process. No certifications, no CNA status. I'll give it to them. They did give guidelines on how to better secure their environments and their products. When we look at the actual products and those different, again, PCS7 and WinCC, no CVE published to even similar devices like TIA 2000 and things like that. From potential attack surface perspective, no specific configurations, too much to make the product more secured. Firmware and OS versions, again, we're seeing that it took many years until there was some update. I think it was about 7 years from the release of that specific version. Lifecycle management, so it was actually getting closer to end of support, which happened in 2010 for WinCC. So again, we gave some 3, and ISC certification, none. So now you see the risk again, what would have happened if I took this approach in 2009 before the event happened and tried to calculate. Again, just to remind everyone, I wouldn't go and do it for everything, but for our key assets, for our key vendors, this could be a good approach to start addressing and quantifying those risks. So let me try and summarize. Now, we are talking that even if I don't have vulnerabilities, it doesn't mean that there's no risk. We are looking for a structured approach that we believe both measuring the vendor and measuring the devices could be a clear way to start creating some awareness and maybe some repository of scoring based on that. Our goal is that this becomes a community thing. We truly believe that the power of such a thing is not just to have this tool, but hopefully that people use it. We are looking for feedback to make it better. We're always looking for that. And hopefully, once people are using it, the goal is even to start building a repository. And maybe, just maybe, this could also be leveraged to create more awareness within the community, both from asset owners, but also from the suppliers. Think about it. What if now I'm a vendor, and this is starting to be used quite commonly, and I get a bad score based on that? Maybe, just maybe, it starts driving some more awareness also from the suppliers. So the goal is really to make it an open source, that people would use it, and that together as a community we'll be able to also help all of us address risks that are not always fully known. So unfortunately, the webpage itself was not ready until there was the deadline of bringing the last version of the presentation. But if you'd like, we do have here later on in the center like a QR code so you can scan and get to the webpage. And you can also come visit us at our booth on level 2, where you can scan the QR code, so at least you'll get the link to the calculator, and you can hopefully later on use it. And again, we're always looking for feedback on that. So that was basically my presentation. And now if anyone has some questions, you do have mics over there, and please go to them so I can hear you. And now is the time for questions.
Sorry, it just took me a second to get to the mic.
Yeah.
Hi, my name is Matt Tompkins. I'm the head of intelligence at FERC. I just had a few questions. First, I really applaud the effort. There's the big unknown of the zero vulnerability products and vendors, so an effort to fill that in, I think, is a really good initiative. To your goal of kind of having it be standardized or have it be a community effort, have you thought at all about taking this, or maybe you already have, and put it in some sort of white paper format that can be more widely disseminated, not just kind of in person in the, basically, is there a white paper available is my question. And then my other question is, I wonder, have you taken the CSAV approach and applied it to the vendors that scored well in your bar chart there to kind of validate the CSAV scores, kind of that those vendors score well?
Yeah, so definitely great question. So for the first one, we will also release like some kind of like guides, and again, the goal is to actually upload it to a Git, and that way people could interact with it, provide feedback, and also hopefully build repository as they use it. And for your second question, yes, we checked multiple scenarios, good vendors, bad vendors, good products, bad products to validate ourselves. And I also invite you and everyone else to try it. And if you find something that doesn't look like it working as it should, let us know. And the goal is really to make it public for anyone to use.
Great, thanks. It's a great initiative.
Thank you.
There, great presentation. Just a question on, do you feel like any of the metrics that you have to, or any of the inputs, do you consider them to be subjective at all, or are there pretty clear guidelines on how to score each one? We recently, we had a session earlier where it was 100% based on the NVD information for the vendors, and none of these factors are being included. So it's interesting to see that we have one approach over there that uses none of the same information. It almost like, a little matchmaking would be helpful here, but.
Yeah, I think what we did, for example, and again, this will be part of the guidelines, is we actually just went and looked on, just Google it, right, or ChatGPT it, just like whether there are any vulnerability guidelines for this specific vendor, whether there are any certifications from a security standpoint for this specific vendor. And what we found is that in most cases, you get good results, which is sufficient to, based on that, give the scoring. I mean, I agree that there is some level of, each and every one can take it a little bit different, because I can score 3 or 4 based on what I found. But we think after, again, when we did the test, we actually took multiple people and tried to give them also some of the specific vendors or specific products and see whether they get to some almost same score. And usually it was almost the same.
Cool, thank you.
Hi, I guess just an earlier point about validating your findings. For those vendors or assets you considered risky, did you do any testing of those things to say, this is, if it's scored a 9, it's risky. Did you do any penetration tests or anything on those to validate those findings that it is indeed risky?
Yeah, so we also, within our tests, right, we also took, as we did here, multiple examples. What would have been happening if I did it before there was a finding, right? And this helped us to validate ourselves, instead of trying and going and penetrating the asset or things like that, because this was the score after they have a CVE known, and this is before. So we tried to use that as we did our testing to validate ourselves that it really makes sense.
Gotcha, thank you.
Sure. Okay, with that, I want to thank everyone for coming and joining me, and hopefully you use it. Thank you, everyone.